A very good evening and welcome to the second and final episode of our special program on the occasion of the International Humanitarian Pledging Conference for Syria. The summit concluded its meetings yesterday, which were conducted at Bayan Palace, right here in the state of Kuwait. We are coming to you live from our studios at the Ministry of Information. First, we would like to welcome our guest this evening, Dr.Nayef Al-shammari, Assistant Professor of Economic Studies at Kuwait University. Thank you for answering our call, Professor, and this is your second, I believe, your second time with KTV2. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Before we speak to our guest, His Highness the Emir, Sheikh Sabah Al-Ahmed Al-Jabr Sabah, was approached by the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon with the idea of hosting a conference in Kuwait to generate funds to help the people of Syria, an idea which was highly welcomed by His Highness the Emir. The conference, which became known as the International Humanitarian Pledging Conference for Syria, was chaired by the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon and was attended by delegations from 59 countries, as well as 13 UN agencies, 4 regional organizations, the International Committee of the Red Cross, the ICRC, the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent, and 17 NGOs. The money pledged during the conference exceeded the UN's target of $1.5 billion. The UN Secretary General voiced his delight in his closing speech at the success of the humanitarian conference and at the contributions collected, 2/3 of which will go to help the Syrian refugees and the rest to help those still in Syria. The largest contributions came from the state of Kuwait, followed by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. Yesterday, during the conference, our correspondents had the opportunity to conduct interviews with some of the high-level guests. Here are some of those interviews.
Extremely important because, first of all, Kuwait is a very generous country and announced this morning a very important contribution. So we believe that it's important that the Emir, that the country is hosting this conference in this region because there is a clear understanding that the Arab world is the first one who is, supporting the Syrian people. And we're happy all together, the Europeans, the Americans and others, to be together here to support the Syrian people.
Very important step forward with Kuwait hosting this conference because to date the majority of contributions to the UN, particularly to WFP, have been received from what are called traditional donors, the Western donors. But Kuwait has become a contributor to WFP even before this conference. And then for Kuwait to host this conference today says to the world, this is not a conflict or a crisis for the Western world, but for the entire global community.
We are very, very grateful for Kuwait hosting this conference on the Syria crisis. One of the key issues that has affected the response is a lack of resources. And Kuwait being willing to host a conference, but also making this very generous contribution of $300 million is extremely, extremely welcome news and helpful to the response.
How much?
Welcome back to the program, and now back to our guest this evening in the studio, Dr.Nayef Al-shammari, Assistant Professor of Economic Studies at Kuwait University. I know you had a very busy day and you had to leave from the university straight here to the studio. We thank you very much for coming.
No problem.
Dr. Nayef, we heard a lot of words of thanks, of gratitude, as we also saw the interviews a few minutes ago. Also, His Highness the Emir voiced happiness about the results, and of course Ban Ki-moon, the UN Secretary General, voiced his gratitude to the state of Kuwait and to the amount which exceeded the UN's target. How would you rate the success, in your opinion, of the Syrian Donors Conference, which was held here in the state of Kuwait?
The successful degree of any projects actually can be rated through or by number of goals. So by number of goals that have been achieved. So now if you want to look at any project you do, the question can be asked, did we achieve the goal or not? So now let's ask ourselves, Kuwait targeted one a decent number of countries to contribute into that conference, and I think we did achieve very decent numbers.
59.
59, that's very good number. Number two, Kuwait targeted the $1.5 billion announced by the UN, and I think we achieved that number. I think we achieved more than 1.5. It's 1.8 or something like that. Also, Kuwait targeted an effective media coverages to give more incentive for countries to go and donate, and I think we did achieve that. So, my opinion, I think we did achieve very good, successful degree for the conference, and that actually by the efforts made by His Highness Sheikh Sabah Al-Ahmed, and by the contributions and the responses of the other countries.
So overall, A+ all over the board.
Definitely. I mean, if you're targeting 1.5 and you're achieving more than 1.5 billion, so we're already achieving more than what we actually wanted.
Now, what does this mean for Kuwait? As you know, as we as Kuwaiti people, and as you know, it wasn't only the countries that generated monies before the conference. Also, Kuwaiti people, the private sector, have contributed to this very important cause. What does this mean to us Kuwaitis and to the country?
Kuwait, I mean, this is not new, by the way. It's not strange for Kuwait to do this kind, or to call for these kind of conferences. We've called for many conferences for different reasons, actually. We've done it for Palestine, we've done it for Syria, we've done it for many other countries. But now let's ask ourselves, we felt what, we felt some of the Syrian people actually are feeling now. I mean, the Iraqi invasion, for example, right. I mean, Kuwaiti suffered from that Iraqi invasion. And we feel our brothers and sisters there in Syria, what happened there. And the donation, again, it's not strange, the number of donations, I mean, and always we made some calls for different conferences. Just recently we've had the third conference in Riyadh, and the first conference actually was just a call, an initiative by His Highness Sheikh Sabah Al-Ahmed. So again, I mean, this is not strange. I mean, you're asking, if you're asking this type of question, this is strange actually, because Kuwait always looking for helping people, looking for helping the society, the global society. It's not just the Arab society, it's not just the Muslim society, it's just the overall societies.
Now, Doctor, from past experience, we have seen other conferences and other attempts at raising funds for needy people and for needy causes, and yet the funds that are raised, how can we make sure that the funds are not being abused and not being misdirected to other projects that have nothing to do with what's going on? How can we make sure that this money gets to who needs it the most, the Syrian people,
so
the refugees?
Basically, you're asking, after we make the donation, are we making sure that the donation will go to the needy people?
Right.
That's your question. I mean, now let's talk who's taking care of that donation. I mean, let's face it. I mean, if we're talking about individuals, so probably, I mean, the degree of confidence will be different than if you're talking about institutions. So if you're talking about the, let's say, private institutions, different than talking about the United Nations.
That's right.
So I think this type of donation, especially you're talking about the Syrian, the last conference. So I think the donations made after this conference will be taken care through the United Nations. So at this point,
which is a secure
it's
entity.
Secured plus it is actually they know what they do. Actually, they know how to go there. I mean, if you give it to any other institutions, probably they're going to have difficulties to go and enter into the Syria in this difficult situation. But
dangerous as well.
Exactly. But for the United Nations, they can do it. They can go there officially. They have no problems getting there without any restrictions compared to other institutions if you go and give them some donations. So yes, for sure that donations will go to the right place through hopefully the right institutions, which is the United Nations.
Now, some media outlets have predicted that the $1.5 billion, well, it's a little bit more than that now, will probably suffice the refugees and the Syrian people for the next 6 months, you know, if you push it, maybe 7 months. But, you know, what do we do then? I mean, we repeat this. Does this mean that we have to find a solution as quickly as possible? And it doesn't look like that's going to materialize anytime soon.
The problem is not to reach or to take or to transfer the money to the needy people through this institution, which is the United Nations. The problem, when do we expect to reach, or when do we expect to actually receive the donations, the funds, exactly.
So this will take time, yes.
Definitely. I mean, now when I'm pledging like a number of like 1 million, 2 million, or like 200 million, it's not necessarily that I'm going to give it right away. It's not necessarily that
I don't have it in a suitcase.
Yeah, I mean, see, these type of conferences, there are no enforcement. There are no restrictions for countries, so for donors countries, I mean. There are no restrictions that you should give me the money. I mean, sometimes we say, I'm going to give you 1 million. Sometimes the 1 million will end up with $500,000. Sometimes it will end up with 0 million.
Yeah.
So again, it's not the way or the time to how the time will be transferred to that needy people, especially they need it very badly. It's it's more for when do we expect to achieve, or when do we expect to receive the total amount, which is the total donation amount.
Doctor, moving on to our next report on some of the highlights of the humanitarian conference for Syria, which was hosted right here in the state of Kuwait, a report prepared by Sarah Globe.
His Highness the Emir Sheikh Sabah Al-Ahmad Al-Jaber Al-Sabah hosted the International Humanitarian Pledging Conference for Syria at Bayan Palace. His Highness Sheikh Sabah opened the ceremony saying that the catastrophe in Syria is huge and requires more international effort to help the Syrian people. His Highness also announced Kuwait's contribution of $300 million towards the targeted $1.5 billion needed for the first half of 2013.
Well, today the conference started, and His Highness the Emir addressed the conference about the contribution of Kuwait of $300 million and cleared of gathering all the international community here in Kuwait to express our direct support to the humanitarian Syrian issue.
I think it shows the generosity, it shows the well-behaved of the state of Kuwait, which is really has organized this conference for this purpose. It shows also the importance of the region and how Kuwait is one of the important player in the area.
I think it was a magnificent pledge. I think it was very generous, very welcome, and a very good example for all other delegates.
Co-chair of the conference and UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon appealed to all sides, particularly the Syrian government, to stop the killing and violence, and also urged donor countries to pledge generously.
France is one of the contributors in this pledging conference, and more important than that, France, being a permanent member of the Security Council, has an important role for this crisis because it keeps the dialogue with all parties in the Security Council so as to reach a political solution to this crisis.
So President Obama announced the United States contribution last night of $155 million, which brings our total contribution to $365 million. This is aid that is going directly to the people of Syria. We're prioritizing urgent food, medical assistance and supplies, help to survive the horrible winters, things like ensuring that the water systems still work, and all of this assistance is urgently helping the people of Syria during this incredible crisis.
Well, we've come here as one of the many agencies that are part of the United Nations relief effort, humanitarian relief effort, both inside Syria and throughout the region where the refugees are now taking shelter. So we are here both to talk about what we are doing at the moment, but also to talk about what we could do and should be doing if we get the funds that we desperately need. Because like the rest of the agencies and like the United Nations in general, the appeal so far has been very much underfunded, and we're hoping very much that more countries will follow the very generous example of the state of Kuwait, who's made this amazing donation today or pledge today, and that others will step forward in order to ensure that we do our work and that we're able to reach more and more children across inside Syria itself and in the 4 or 5 countries that are hosting refugees.
For her part, Under-Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator Valerie Amos said the aim of the aid was to provide relief supplies to those badly affected, people who have fled their homes, rebuilding infrastructure and helping the poor. Following the pledging sessions, a press conference was held to announce the results of the pledges, which exceeded $1.5 billion US target set by the United Nations.
Welcome back to the program, and thank you, Sarah, for that report. Now back to our guest this evening, Dr.Nayef Al-shammari, Assistant Teacher of Economic Studies at Kuwait University. Doctor, the high-level attendance was clear. I mean, we had a few leaders of countries, we had foreign ministers, we had 13 UN agencies, very important UN agencies, and we had 17 NGOs, 59 nations, as we mentioned. How would you what would you say about this? How would you comment on such a high-level attendance?
See, the bad thing sometimes about these type of conferences, donors conferences, that some countries do not fulfill or do not honor their promises. So I think the high-level attendance, especially from some of the presidents there, will increase the accountability of receiving the pledged amount, and that will help reaching the targeted amount with with making sure that the one who made the donation, or the one who announced that donation or announced that pledge, is the president. Is not like a third level in the country or a fourth level in the country. So that, I think, will increase the accountability of the receiving, or the accountability of the countries, and the accountability of receiving the targeted donation.
So in other words, they will have to commit because of the high level presence at this conference.
Yeah, definitely, because there is no enforcement in these type of conferences. There is no enforcement
pledges,
for
yes.
countries to fulfill their obligations, or to fulfill actually their, it's not obligations, again, it's donations.
Right.
So by attending, I mean, when the president says, like, I'm going to donate like 1 million or 2 billion or 3 billion, 3 million actually. So I mean, when a president says that, it's different than the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is saying that. So that will give more accountability that the country will fulfill the promise in this case.
Now, some of the neighboring countries are suffering, not just from the number of refugees coming in, but it's also very costly economically to those countries. Who do you feel are the countries that will suffer most, do you think? From you have Lebanon on one side, you have Jordan, the other neighboring countries around Syria, Turkey is another country.
Talking about the economic suffering, I mean, definitely Syria got affected. I mean, the economy of Syria got hurt. So, I mean, the economic sector is part of all sectors in the economy. It's part of the education sector, it's part of the health sector, part of the all sectors actually in the economy. So imagine when all sectors got affected, definitely the influence or the effect on the economic sector is severe. So Syria has good economic relationship with the neighboring countries. Let's talk about Turkey. The good destination for the Turkish exports is Syria, or used to be Syria actually. Now, because of the crisis, the imports, the Turkish exports actually, or the Syrian imports from Turkey dropped a lot. So who got affected? Turkey got affected. Plus the number of refugees in Turkey actually is a huge number. So who is supposed to give more more humanity expenses? Part of it actually Turkey. So in this side, Turkey will get affected. Now let's talk. You mentioned Lebanon. Also, Lebanon has good relationship with Syria, especially in the labor sector. Most of the Syrian labor, actually workers, go to Lebanon and work there. So the labor movement between Syria and Lebanon is very effective. It used to be very effective. Why? Actually, because companies there, the Lebanese companies, prefer to have Syrian employees actually. Why? Because they're cheap labor. Plus, most of them they work for contracting sector and for the construction sectors. So they prefer to have those type of sectors, those type of labor. What happened because of the crisis? Now the movement in labor is actually weak. So definitely, what happened in Lebanon, that the labor cost actually increases a lot there. Why? Because they missed cheap. Good quality, actually, Syrian labor. Now let's go to Jordan. Jordan has this type of free trade area with Syria, and according to this free trade area, Syria exports wheat to Jordan, and Jordan exports cement to Syria. But what and because of that, actually, Jordan actually saved around $10 million because of this type of exchange in trade. So what happened because of that? I mean, economic sanctions on Syria Now even the agriculture sector got hit there, so they're not enjoying the receiving wheat from Syria as before. Also, beside that, businessmen in Jordan, also the investors there, traders especially, they used a port in Syria. They're not using the port which is Al-Aqaba in Jordan, they're using the one in Syria. Why? Because it's closer to the borders, plus it's cheap there, the tariffs, plus they're having this free trade area. So they're enjoying having the port, especially for the goods that coming from Europe. What's happened now? I mean, now to have to receive the goods from Europe through this Syrian port will be unsafe. Unsafe.
Reroute.
Exactly. So you have to go to the Aqaba again port. So that will be more expensive. So also the traders there in Jordan got affected as well. Now let's go to Iraq. Iraq has very good economic relationship with Syria. Actually, Syria is exporting agricultural products and some light manufactured goods to Iraq. The other way around, Iraq is exporting oil to Syria. So what is exactly stopped? But what is special about the Syrian products, especially the agricultural products, cheap products. So the Iraqi people enjoyed at that time the cheap products from Syria. Now this type of trade stopped already. So now the food prices in Iraq is already increased. So the Iraqi consumer is paying more to get especially the agricultural products. To end this, everyone got affected definitely because of the crisis in Syria. Nobody is happy actually. So economically and in terms of the politics side. So I hope that will be, will finish. The resolution definitely is not going to be economic resolution. Resolution is actually political resolution. Yes. There is no doubt. If you want to improve the economic of the neighborhood or the economic situation in Syria, no solution for economic, nothing. It's just so you have to go and talk about politics.
Well, this brings us to, I think, a very important question. The Iraqi invasion on Kuwait, Kuwait was able to overcome economically. I believe, I'm not sure if I can say with relative ease, but we have the oil income which was able to help Kuwait. How difficult, or maybe you can explain more, how difficult will it be for Syria to overcome the economic hardships from such a prolonged, now almost 2 years of crisis?
It's hard to compare the case of Kuwait to the case of Syria. Kuwait is a wealthy country. Syria, oil is just a small part of their production. So it's easily to fix the Kuwaiti economy, but it's hard to fix the Syrian economy. Why? What happened there in Syria. Syria is not just an economy got affected. The agriculture got affected. The stock exchange market got affected, declined by 85%. Sometimes it's easier to start from zero than like fixing something happened to the economy. Also, now you're talking about inflation is exceeding 50% in Syria. The currency itself loses almost 48 or 50% of its value compared to the dollar. So it takes time. Takes time, but should be a structural change will happen to the economy. So in this case, we'll say yes, we can overcome the crisis, and we can overcome everything. We can fix the economy, the problems happening to the economy. So it's not easy, but I think it takes time. The Kuwaiti situation is different. Why? Because we have already at that time actually we got a loan from the the generation fund. So it's future generation fund, which is easier to get, which is actually our own money, but we get it as a loan. But in the case of Syria, we're going to go ahead and talk about the donations again to rebuild the economy and rebuild the country. So that will be.
We have a minute left. Maybe you can just explain to us if this will trickle, this economic effect will trickle down to other Arab nations if this crisis gets prolonged 3 or 4 years down the line.
No doubt, every country, especially in the Arab countries, they have good economic trading relationship with Syria. They have investments in Syria. So now investments, all projects actually stopped in Syria. So these projects actually, these are our own projects. Even in Turkey actually, Turkey had projects in Syria. They stopped the projects there. So who got affected there? Nobody wants their investments to just, I mean, stop. To, I mean, they need their investments back. They need their returns back. So everyone got affected, but hopefully that won't last that much.
Well, we hope so, Doctor. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of our special program on the International Humanitarian Pledging Conference for Syria. A special thank you goes out to our guest this evening, Dr.Nayef Al-shammari, the Assistant Teacher of Economic Studies at Kuwait University. I would also like to thank our correspondents, Nadia Ali and Sarah Glob, for providing us with the reports, as well as the rest of the team at the English News Department who helped prepare this program. And finally, I would like to thank you, our viewers, for joining us this evening for our final live program on the International Humanitarian Pledging Conference for Syria. Have a good night.